Hello friends and welcome back to the Bordo Show. I'm Bordo and finally I'm coming around back to presenting light armor. Specifically in this series I'll present padded armor, leather armor and hide armor and showcase its strengths, its weaknesses, its historical uses, also later how to make them. But let's get back to the basics. First in this series is of course padded armor. So, one of the first things I have to mention about padded armor, of course comparing with leather armor, it's much more popular cousin in the light armor sphere, is that in D&D, for some odd reason, padded armor has disadvantage in stealth, while leather doesn't. Which I frankly do not understand, because as you can see, when you move around in leather, even hardened leather, soft leather, it makes much more noise than moving around. This is the rings making the sound. Moving around in cloth. Basically, as you can logically understand, cloth absorbs sound, but leather actually makes sound. Hardened and soft leather, it's squeaky sometimes, it's blah blah blah. But because big leather has dominance on fantasy sphere, and rogues, all those rogues have to wear their black skin-tight leather armor, the designers in D&D for some reason decided that leather armor should be the main and only style of armor for light armor, and padded armor should be shafted for no reason. Because why would you wear padded armor when it has disadvantage on stealth, when most people who want to wear padded light armor will have to sneak around, like rogues, like mages who don't want to be noticed and squished, and others like them. For this reason, I think padded armor gets a bad rap. Next, I would like to mention different types of padded armor. Of course, I'm wearing what some would call arming jacket, but there are vast amounts of padding armor in history with different cultures and different peoples in different time periods. One of the first that comes to my mind is that regular cape was used by the Roman legionnaires when they didn't have armor to wrap around their arms, like maybe not exactly like this, but by wrapping it around your hand, you're creating a thick layer of padding, a cushion that can be used as a shield. Interestingly enough, even to this day, some Africans, I think, some peoples in Africa use rug and cloth shields to protect themselves, which is really interesting. But the most popular padded armor is this arming doublet or arming jack or gambeson or whatever, which is basically the most popular style of padded armor in Europe. And as you all know, history only happens in Europe. But I'm joking, of course. So let's talk about it. In design-wise, there's three different types of gambeson or arming jack or blah blah blah. It's the one that you wear underneath mail armor. For example, here we go. This is mail. Okay. This is more typical example of an under armor padding. Mine is more Pinterest inspired than historical, but the principle is the same, to create padding underneath mail or other heavy armor, like for example plate. Later versions of arming doublets even have laces that are meant to be used to tie the plates on, and even have mail sewn on the joints where plates can't cover, so you wouldn't have to wear a whole suit of mail underneath the plate. As you can imagine, when you get hit by a saber, it's really wouldn't be it would stop all slashing damages from a saber or a sword, but the bludgeoning force that comes from an attack by this type of weapon would still be absorbed by your body. So to protect your flesh from being hit with a sword or some other weapons, you usually have to wear some type of padding underneath the armor. So the basic idea here is that there is cloth from two sides and there is some type of padding in between. For armor that is worn underneath your body, underneath your mail or lamella or other types of metal armor, it has to be a bit thinner so you can move around freely and don't get restrained. But there is of course a second type of arming jack or padding armor that is worn over mail, that can be multiple layers of cloth, maybe 3, 4, maybe 6, that does the same principle of sandwiching mail in between two padding cloths.
Because the under padding is much thinner for flexibility, it wouldn't hurt to wear an extra padding over your mail shirt. This would also help strengthen mail's vulnerability to piercing damages. But I think wearing something like a leather coat would do much better job at a cheaper cost.
Because on its own, padded armor is unfortunately not as powerful. Of course, it's better than nothing at all. So, of course, when you're going into battle, it's always better to wear something over your clothes to not get nicked and scraped by shrubbery and trees and walking around in nature, or some light cuts, because in the Middle Ages, even a small scrape could kill you, and most attacks can miss and just leave a small scrape. So to protect yourself from small scrapes and bruises, that's why it's light armor, and in, for example, D&D, it gives you only +1. This type of armor isn't usually as powerful. But the third kind of gambeson is thick gambeson that is worn without any other type of mail or some other metal armor, which is 30 or even like 20 or 40 layers of cloth, linen, or even silk, layers upon layers.
This type of armor could be many layers of cloth or just thicker stuffed cloth padding sandwich, or even a mix of both. It's all depending on how wealthy you are, because some think that padded armor is a poor man's protection. But creating a high quality thread count 20 or 30 layered textile armor would be very expensive by even today's standards, and you can imagine quite heavy. But stuffing two sewn shirts together with bunch of wool, hair, or cotton, or even reed puffs would be much cheaper. And many still added extra metal protection even if they didn't wear full suits of armor.
Padding armor is great against bludgeoning damage, but padding armor has to be multiple thick layers to protect from direct blunt forces, slashing, so it doesn't go through enough, thick enough, and piercing. This is the case because here I'm going to use a burlap sack as an example. As you can see, it's made of woven textile material. This would actually be quite good because it's a thick rope of material as armor, but it has to be taken for multiple layers to be actually used, because it's made of fibrous materials and it's woven. It's much easier to pierce through. As you can see, it's like 8 layers of burlap sack, and the piercing weapon that I'm holding gets through quite easily, because as you can see, even in double layered, there's a through line pattern of weaving that leaves a lot of gaps that a piercing weapon can easily pierce through, and it's quite easy to cut. It should be much higher thread count, and it should be overlaid multiple layers so the fibers go in different direction and the piercing weapon can't go through. But live in Western Europe, in the mountains of the Caucasus, you find my favorite type of padinama, because it's my people's padinama, which is most popularly known as nabadi.
And we will talk about it and more interesting styles of padidama from all over the world on the next episode. Had to cut it short here. It was getting a bit long and would have taken much longer to edit. So, thanks for watching. Please support the channel by liking, subscribing, and all those wonderful things. And of course, comment on what do you think about padidama. Much more to come, but hopefully soon.